Richard Brown, Richie Gray and Peter Gallagher were all part of the 1988 Scottish Schools Tour, 2 players and 1 coach. The same tour to New Zealand that Doddie Weir was on back in the day, and now as a tribute to Doddie and to raise funds for research into MND. Richard, you're all doing something rather special, aren't you?
We are. Our captain of the tour, Gary Kennard, got in touch not long after Doddie passed and got a group together and decided we should do something. He meant a lot to us on that tour, and it's amazing how it's snowballed with guys coming from all over the world to take part.
And they literally are.
Well, they are. We've got guys coming in from Australia, Canada, Singapore, Gibraltar, France, Buzzles,
Duns and Gala.
And you've got plenty of good weather to look forward to.
Well, the worry is we've got a cycle next Thursday all day from the Carter Bar, which is quite special. As we know, Doddie got engaged there to Cathay, so we start there and we make our way back to Melrose throughout the day. We do have a little pint and a bowl of soup stop at Ancram. I'm worried about getting them back out on the bikes after that. And we do that all day Thursday, and then Friday we are hiking over the Pentlands into Edinburgh. The worry is the forecast's looking a little bit iffy at the moment.
It certainly is, isn't it? And we were talking about 88 grand is what your target is, and I think you're well on your way at the moment, up to 20, isn't it?
Yeah, I think 88 grand was quite aspirational, but we'll keep pushing for it, and there's a lot of fundraising to come. I think by the time we get involved on the 2 days and at Murrayfield for the Italy game, hopefully we'll get a boost. But it's been amazing how it's come in. It sort of plateaued at 12 for a couple of weeks, and then just since the press releases by the Foundation and the SRU last week, we've jumped another £5,000-6,000, so delighted.
But how did you get these guys together? I mean, there's about 22 of the 25 or so players are going to be taking part in this. 2, sadly, are no longer with us, but I mean, that's a hell of an effort. You've obviously kept in touch since those days, 35 years ago.
Well, it's going to be interesting for me because most of them I haven't seen since they were stick insects at 18 years old. And all these years later, I think it will be difficult to recognise some of them because I'm sure the shapes will have changed a bit. But the characters and the banter that's going on already on the WhatsApp group shows that the camaraderie is still there that was built up in 1988, and it's amazing to the response that there's been to this, and they're all desperately keen to come and meet up. And the stories will get exaggerated, of course, and it'll be interesting, really interesting.
Now, Pete, you obviously were in charge of the coaching with Rob Moffat back then. It was very young Rob Moffat, I would imagine, then, 35 years ago. So
you would hardly recognise him. He had a little moustache then, and he had a lot of hair.
Oh, I remember the moustache and all the video.
Yeah.
But, I mean, how did you control, Doddie Weir, Richie Gray, characters like that? Extraordinary times and some great memories.
Oh, yeah. Well, it wasn't easy, obviously, because they were characters, but the other side of the coin was that they were desperately keen on the rugby. And so it wasn't too difficult to marry the two elements, that they wanted to be themselves and have a lot of fun, which was great, but they also wanted to concentrate on the rugby. And we knew it was going to be a very tough tour. And so it was easier for Rob and I to motivate these guys and to get them interested, and at the same time to let them have the fun that everybody wanted to have.
Now, Richie Gray here, the collision king himself. Back then, of course, let's just say it was a bit of a rough and tough tour.
Yeah, it was, and in some ways, and this is where I look at youngsters now that are playing the game, and don't get me wrong, the game's changed a huge amount since 1988, but we were still then, allowed to ruck, for example.
And
so
we're talking real rucking.
So you were talking 8 people going in over the top of who was ever on the ground, and it was just, that's what you did. And we were just speaking off air here that in the first game against Hannon Shield Schools, which I think are now South Canterbury, that's what they'd be called now, I can remember myself and Doddie deciding, right, listen, we're going to go for this, in a big way, and we went to this local sports shop and we bought these studs that must have been about 28-30 mil long, and we had the washers on to get everything sorted. So myself and Doddie decided that we'll take it upon ourselves to go for it, and I can remember afterwards we got beat in our first game, which was a real shocker, but they were going to send us home because of over vigorous play, and there was a legendary administrator called Archie McIntyre who came from Morrison's Academy, very old school, I would think ex-RAF, great man, but just couldn't handle this, you know. And I remember myself and Doddie got brought into the office, and you've let your families down, you've let yourselves down, the country down. We're seriously thinking of sending you home, you know, and we're thinking, oh no, what have we done here?
After 4 days.
Yeah, after 4 days, but I think it was just to try to lay a marker down that, guys, you know, we've got to. But, you know, credit to Peter and Rob, within a matter of about, I would say, 7 to 14 days, because, as Peter said, we were keen, we loved our rugby, we just wanted to learn. Going to New Zealand, it was just after the first World Cup as well, which was just, the place was oozing rugby, you know. You just had to get better, and we did, and we actually went on to have an incredibly successful tour, beat some big teams, and we just got better, you know. And it's always lived with me, because you've gone on to coach, that there were certain things we did on that tour are still absolutely important in today's game, you know. One of them's body height, you know, and being able to be in control of your body, especially now when you're looking at the high tackle frameworks and you're looking at breakdown laws and whatever. It's still incredibly important on how we were trained. So Peter and Rob did a good job in getting a group of boys shipped into shape from all over Scotland.
Now, Richard, this was a real learning experience, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was tough, as Richie said, and the body height and the physicality around the breakdown was something that we'd probably never experienced before. However, front row, we actually had the edge most often in the front row, because they had very strict rules about, you know, how far they could push scrums, while we didn't at that stage at under 18 rugby. So we were quite used to putting an extended shove on, and we did well scrummaging. We struggled elsewhere, but we did well scrummaging. But my memory from that tour was the border representation, which we probably don't see as often now, given the age group rugby is quite dominated by the private school system. We had, you know, 6 Melrose Colts on that tour. We had Richie from Gallagher, we had a couple of Selkirk boys and a couple of Duns boys. So that's quite a huge representation from the area. And obviously both coaches were based in the borders. So that's probably unusual compared to nowadays.
Pete, I mean, health and safety out the window completely back then. It was like 35 years ago. Different ballgame completely.
Oh, absolutely different ball game, and Richie's alluded to it, that the rucking had to be fierce rucking, because we knew from the reports that we got back from New Zealand that it was going to be very, very physical, and Rob and I weren't convinced that these guys were really aware of how physical it was going to be. So the legendary couple of weeks before we went away on the back pitch at Murrayfield, we said to them, right, this is going to be a sample of what you're going to experience out there. Go and play for half an hour on that back pitch amongst yourselves with no rules whatsoever. You can do no rules at all. You can do whatever you like. You can make it as physical as you like, because this is what you're going to experience. Eventually,
I said to Peter, it was the best half an hour of my career, my whole career.
And eventually it got so physical that the doc intervened and said, look, you'll need to stop, or we're going to have nobody left to go to New Zealand. And we thought we'd given that sort of physicality, but again, as Richie alluded to, the very first game, we didn't know what had hit us. But fortunately, they were very keen to help us. And the very next day, when we got out there, a Sunday morning, with a priest with his collar on. I think he'd been to the church at 7 so that he could be with us at 10, and he gave us a service on Sunday morning of how to ruck, and basically body height. And I can recall there was a couple of pads and had big thick ropes round them at a certain height, and he told the boys, right, you just drive on these pads. Well, initially they were coming up with torn ears and blood across their forehead and everything, because they weren't getting low enough, and they soon learned that if you didn't get low, you're going to be in the hospital getting stitched up. So the body height became better and better and better, and that was an area that we really concentrated on for the remainder of the tour, and it paid huge dividends.
Well, Richie, I mean, what a learning experience for any kids, you know, going out there, going to New Zealand, spending weeks on end there, playing rugby, learning life skills as well, and coming out the other side.
Yeah, you know, it's just, I always think, you know, we were so lucky because we were still in the amateur era then, and, you know, the game's changed beyond all recognition now, but from a personal point of view, we're just so happy to have gone through that, because you can still understand what the amateur ideal was and what you had to do. And you know, I suppose now in professional rugby we're trying so hard to try and keep parts of that, and it's very, very difficult because it's a totally different sport. But the bottom line is, it's taken a group of players away from all different areas of the country, different schools. You had your Merkistons to Gall Academies to Selkirk High Schools to Errolstons to Golspie up in the north, and you brought all these boys together, and off you went, and we had a phenomenal kind of culture in the place. And I always laugh because you read about these books of culture and developing culture, and you just develop culture through honesty, hard work, and good people, and we're lucky that we were well led with Peter and Rob, and also Ian Lobin, the old president, who's sadly not with us anymore, Archie McIntyre, who's not with us anymore, Dr. Ian Adam from Stuart's Melville. They were just good people, and we just had a phenomenal time. And I think that's why so many boys have made the effort to come back from all over the world to cycle, to walk, and then to walk into Murrayfield, a week on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think it's not just a celebration of Doddie. We lost another friend from that tour, far too young, a young 10 who often kept Graham Shiel out of the team. So that's how good he was. A chap called Gary Sisman who died in an air accident in Africa when he was only 21, 22. So the guys have been talking about that a lot as well over the last couple of weeks on our WhatsApp channel. So I think bringing everyone together is going to be amazing, and we'll create more memories.
And I mean, what a squad as well. I mean, you had Andy Nicol and Scott Nicol and Graham Shiel, you mentioned, and a few others as well, who went on to win considerable amount of caps for Scotland.
Yeah, I think it was a very good outcome from the tour, and I think what a tour like that did, because we'd never done anything like that before, what it did was it accelerated the development of the players, to the extent that Doddie and Andy Nicol and Graham Shiel and Scott Nicol and so on got capped probably earlier than they might have done if they had been around tours in Scotland or whatever. I'm pretty sure that tour accelerated the development of these youngsters to get international caps earlier in their life.
Most of those players, Stuart, also went on to play district rugby, so most of them all played South, Glasgow, Edinburgh, North and Midlands. I remember we all met up again on the Scottish Students World Cup in 1992. There was a huge group of the same squad. So, it was good to see everybody coming through. And that was when club rugby, there was no, pro rugby then. The Reivers in Edinburgh, Glasgow hadn't started. So when we all came out of that tour, we automatically played against each other. Gary Kennard, our captain, played for Heriots along with Stuart Paul. You had Fred here played for Melrose. I was playing for Gala. So you went on this tour of a great bond, and then 6 months later we were all in our senior teams very quickly, actually, because we were only 18 years old.
Probably too quickly.
Yeah,
for
possibly
some.
knocking the 10 bells out of each other,
My first game for Melrose was against Jerry McGuinness at Hoyk, and that was a bit of an unfair competition.
But I mean, these tours, there's not enough of it today, is there, really? I mean, these are experiences that boys should have. And I know some of them, they get on scholarships and they go out to New Zealand. There's some away at the moment in South Africa and places like that. But collectively, as a kind of Scottish schools, that doesn't really happen, does it?
It doesn't happen now, and it is a shame, because we've talked about it before, but there was a kind of cultural element to it as well. These guys had the privilege of going to stay with New Zealand families and be part of the culture of the family, and they've kept links up with these families all the years later. In fact, some of the families came across here to watch them play that they'd stayed with in New Zealand. So when you tour now, that element is gone. It's very much the team goes into a hotel, the team goes to training, team plays, the team comes back. Now you still build up a bit of a bond, but nothing like the relationships that were established in that kind of tour.
Because it was all inclusive,
It was
wasn't it?
totally inclusive. We stayed with some real characters in the families, and we still talk about them yet. And that was a big part. And the families, New Zealand families, came to support the Scottish boys when we played against New Zealand teams. So that bond became really strong, and that's an element now that's completely gone. Health and safety and all these different things now doesn't allow that to happen, which is a shame.
Now, Richard, this challenge that you're doing, it's a mixture of walking, of cycling as well, and obviously raising money as well. But I mean, more than that, you're just getting all the boys, getting the band back together again, almost, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we've got, in addition to the challenge itself, we've got a few social events, as you can imagine, around that. So we start on next Thursday at the Carter Bar. We cycle to Melrose. We have a private dinner in the restaurant at Burt's on Thursday night. We then have a very early start on Friday, which might be challenging depending how the Thursday night goes. And then after our walk, once we get to Edinburgh, we have another dinner at the Scottish Malt Whisky Society. So I think that's allowed when you get to a certain age.
Absolutely. And I have to ask you if your favourite Doddie story. Start with you, Richard.
My favourite Doddie story is actually pre-Scottish Schools. It's back when we were playing at Melrose in the age group, and it was a tournament in France, in Orthez in France. Stirling County were there. I think maybe Kelso were there. We were there. And Doddie, we played against French teams and they didn't like the rucking at all. And then I remember playing against a Spanish side who were just dirty. And they spat on the front row as we were going down to scrum. And the next thing I knew, Doddie's huge arm, came from behind and walloped the boy. And that was it. It just set the tone for the day. And that was one of my earliest and favourite memories of Doddie.
Peter?
Mine is probably, staying on the tour theme. I recall, and I was just reminding Richie of this because he was part of it as well, but on an internal flight in New Zealand, I mean, Doddie was always life and soul of the party anyway on the tour, even at 18 years old. But we got on the flight, the internal flight. The flight had just reached cruising height when Doddie and his pal Richie here got up and took over. They got the hats off the air hostesses and they took over running the plane between I think it was, I don't know whether it was Christchurch and up to Auckland.
We ended up in Samoa.
And those were the days when you couldn't lock the pilot away, so he was a bit worried as well because the door kept opening. These two guys were just trying to get in, and I can remember somebody shouting, "Richie, don't touch any buttons. Doddie, don't touch any buttons in the cockpit." So yeah, I mean, and the good thing was all the passengers and the crew bought into it as well, and it was a great fun flight. And that summed up Doddie really. You just never knew what was going to happen next, but it was always fun, real fun. And it didn't offend anybody, everybody just joined in.
Yeah, Richie, Grey Airlines, another business for you there.
Yeah, it's funny, I've got a lot of stories.
I bet you have.
A lot I possibly can't repeat. But I remember, just to go back to when we were 18, I was meant to get my first cap against England up in Glasgow, and I broke my coccyx bone in the bottom of my back on the Thursday. So I couldn't play, and that was it. And it was the night of the Melrose Sevens. We'd played England. Wasn't a great result for Scottish Schools. In the English team, you had Martin Johnson and I remember Adebayo on the wing. These guys,
Steve Ojomo, Nick
Ojomo. It was a quality English team. So anyway, Doddie had this old Datsun Stanza that he would drive around the borders at about 120 mile an hour, and the back seat was changed for him so he could keep his legs at the length. But we went flying down the road because there was a disco, obviously, at Melrose Sevens. We wanted to get back down there as quick as we could. So we went in by Cortle Ferry Farm. Doddie said, "I'm just going to get changed and get the gear on for the Saturday night." So he came out with white trousers and a white shirt and a pair of black shoes, right? The good old all in white. And I'm thinking, geez. When all of a sudden Jock for the shed, the cow shed, says, "Listen, we're about to calf and I need a hand," right? So anyway, Doddie says, "Right, we'll keep the car running." So I'm standing at the side here because obviously I'm a city boy for Gala. I'd never seen this happen before. And Doddie is literally arm deep into this thing, helping the father. Obviously the calf's born, fantastic. There's blood everywhere, and I imagine he's dressed in a white. I said, "You better get yourself changed." No, I'll be okay. Went into the kitchen, washed his hand off in the dishes, right, that were in the kitchen, got literally into the car, drove down to Melrose. We got back there about 8, 9 o'clock at night. Disco just started. It looked like there had been a murder, right? And he didn't bother a jot, right? That was it. And we obviously had a good night, and we've even met up with Fred and the boys, and they came back down. But that sums him up. But for me, Doddie Weir, sadly passed away, but he has left an incredible legacy,
Everyone's got a story about it.
Well, he has, and also I think there was a lot more to it than just raising money, and we used to discuss this a lot, and I know Fred, and we've always been up and down to the farm to see him over the years, and there's just so much more to it than raising money for MND. There's part of it, a huge part of it, is actually doing exactly what we're doing next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, is bringing people together again. And life's too short not to catch up, pick up a phone, go a walk with somebody that you haven't seen for 10 or 15 years. And for me, there's a sort of hidden agenda, I think, behind what he did. One was raising money for MND, and let's hope we find a cure, but the other one was bringing people together, especially in rugby. Let's be a little bit one-eyed for a minute on teams that you've played for players you've played against, coaches you've been coached by, just keeping us all together, connecting you all. And we've sat for about 2 hours before we've done this interview. We could have spoken for another 4 or 5.
If only we'd recorded it.
Yeah, I know. I'm maybe glad you didn't. So, there'd be a few beeps in there. But, that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about bringing us all together. And sometimes life's too short not to pick up a phone and say, hey, let's go out for a coffee or let's go out for a couple of beers. And that's the key. And I think he'll be smiling on us, because I just know fine well that that's deep down what he wanted.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely amazed that they managed to track you down, because sometimes you're in Fiji, sometimes you're in France, you're here, everywhere.
I'm in France at the moment, so I got back on Sunday.
So what's your current situation? Because you obviously resigned from Fiji because Vern Cotter resigned, and you're very loyal in that way, you've always said.
You always have to do that. So if your head coach goes and the coach that's asked you to come in, then you must go too. I've always been like that, and I've done that in South Africa, Scotland when Vern left, and Fiji. So VC's on his farm in New Zealand. Funnily enough, we've been talking about New Zealand. I'm still with Toulon, so I'll be kind of pretty much focused on Toulon from now until the end of the season, and that's key for me. And then I'm back to America and American football as well. So I'm busy. So there's enough to keep me going, Stuart. Don't worry.
Any other inventions?
There's always other things coming about. Yeah, there's one coming out shortly. Actually, it'll be a good one.
What can you tell us about that?
It's about rucking.
Rucking. What a surprise!
That takes us right back to this New Zealand tour. That's where it all started.
It certainly did. Now, Pete, what are you doing these days? I mean, you'll never retire. I mean, you're coming out for 80, if you don't mind me saying, when you're looking as fit as the other two. And me certainly.
It's a Dunn's water, I think. There's something going on in Dunn's.
It's something to do with the air in Dunn's right enough. No. Yeah. I mean, I should really be stepping back a bit at my age, but like these guys, I still enjoy it a lot. And the last thing I want to do is just sit back and put my feet up. So I'm trying to step back a bit, but I'm still drip feeding odds and ends into particularly the Colts. I'm focusing more on the 16s and the Colts as they come through, and I can add my tuppence worth there, but at the same time I'm trying to make sure that other coaches are developing and they can take over. And my wife, I'm not sure whether she'll be delighted if I step back or whether she's had 50 plus years of me being involved, and if I step back then that'll upset the whole rhythm of the last 50 years, so I'll maybe have to keep going for a wee bit longer.
And Richie, what did your father say about chairs?
My old father, it's funny, because Peter and my father played against each other, because my father's 82 and Peter's 80, so they know each other well and possibly knocked 10 bells at each other for many a year.
We did.
Yeah, my father's got a great saying. He says there's 2 chairs will kill you, the electric chair and the armchair. So you got to keep going, in whatever you're doing, just make sure that you're always keeping yourself busy, active, your mind's always working. The minute you sit down and start looking at the television, it's all over, isn't it?
Yeah. And Richard, what about you? What are you up to?
I'm very much focused on my business career, so I'm a director with a technology services company. But I stay connected to rugby. I was on the board at Melrose recently, and I coached the juniors at Melrose for the last 10, 15 years, just stepping away over the last 2. So the good thing is there's 3 more Doddies in the pipeline, and they all have the same attitude when it comes to rugby. So I think there's great hope in that.
Fantastic. And just finally, of course, tell us how people can donate to this cause.
Yeah, so we've got a Just Giving page. The easiest way to find it is just go onto Just Giving and search for Doddie 88, and you'll see we've got a number of updates there. There's some fantastic old photos from the tour, and it tells a story about what we're doing and why and who the characters are. And we're just grateful for anyone that can spare a few pounds and add to our total.
Well, it's a fantastic thing that you're doing, of course, and it's great to see just 3 of the many. I just can't imagine what it's going to be like on Thursday when you all get together. Mayhem completely. But great to see you, Richard, and Pete, and obviously Richie Gray as well. And all the best of luck with it.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.